Year 1944. The Pacific Ocean burns beneath a crimson dawn. Waves crash like cannon fire against the steel hull of a warship unlike any other. On this day, hidden beneath the salty mist and the echo of distant bombers, the sea carries a monster, not of flesh and bone but of iron, fire, and unstoppable fury. Her name strikes fear across both oceans. Her shadow stretches longer than the horizon, and her power defines the very meaning of naval dominance. She is more than a ship. She is the embodiment of American resolve, a floating fortress built to break empires, to silence fleets, and to turn the tide of a world at war. As dawn spreads across the endless blue, sailors move like clockwork upon her deck. Men hardened by battle, fueled by hope, and haunted by loss. They know that every sunrise could be their last. Beneath them, deep inside her armored heart, engines roar like chained thunder, and the smell of oil, steel, and sweat fills every corridor. Enemy scouts have seen her silhouette and vanished beneath her guns. Her presence alone changes the course of battle. To the Japanese Imperial Navy, she is not just an enemy. She is a legend of destruction. This is the story of America's most dangerous warship of World War II, a vessel so powerful that even time itself still trembles when her name is spoken. Dramatic pause. This is USS Iowa. In the dark winter of 1940, as the world tore itself apart across two oceans, the United States faced an inevitable truth. War was no longer a distant echo. It was approaching like thunder on the horizon. In the shipyards of Brooklyn, New York, thousands of men and women labored under a sky thick with smoke and ambition. The air was alive with the rhythm of industry. Hammers striking steel, sparks cascading like fire rain, cranes groaning as they lifted slabs of armor plate that would soon become part of something greater than any of them could imagine. From the chaos of war's preparation rose a single vision, a warship so powerful, so swift, and so defiant of convention that it would become the beating heart of American sea power. She began as blue lines on parchment, elegant, mathematical, impossible. Naval architects stared at those lines with reverence and disbelief. How could so much weight move so fast? How could such enormous guns rest upon a hull that sliced the water like a blade? The USS Iowa was conceived not merely to join the fleet, but to lead it, to redefine what a battleship could be. Her keel was laid with ceremony and silence, a symbolic act of defiance in a world collapsing under tyranny. Every bolt fastened, every plate welded, every rivet sealed carried a promise that America would never kneel. Weeks became months, and the shipyard turned into a cathedral of creation. Floodlights illuminated the skeletal framework of a titan. Men in heavy coats worked through snow and steam, their breath mingling with the smoke of their torches. The sound of construction echoed across the harbor, drowning out the whispers of doubt. At night, the river reflected her growing form, ribs of steel stretching toward the stars, a metallic beast slowly awakening. To those who built her, the Iowa was not just another battleship. She was destiny in progress. By early 1942, as the Pacific burned and the Atlantic churned with U-boats, the Iowa's hull stood completed. Her body was long and lean, a miracle of balance between weight and speed. Her armor could deflect the heaviest shells, yet her engines promised motion beyond any ship her size had ever achieved. 4 propellers, each larger than a man, would drive her through the ocean at 30+ knots, making her not only the most powerful, but the fastest battleship in the world. Inside her belly, massive turbines waited for breath, as though holding their strength until the day they would awaken and shake the seas themselves. The fitting of her guns was a moment that silenced even the loudest worksite. 3 turrets, each holding 3 16-inch Mark 7 rifles, rose upon her deck like the towers of a fortress. These barrels were monsters, capable of firing shells weighing nearly a ton each, farther than the eye could see. Each shot would strike with the force of an earthquake. And yet the engineering behind them was a symphony of precision. Crews spent weeks calibrating angles, balancing weight, testing hydraulic systems that could traverse and elevate those guns in seconds. It was not just power, it was mastery, human intellect transforming raw elements into controlled devastation. As the Iowa neared completion, the shipyard workers felt something beyond pride. They felt fear, not of the ship itself, but of the responsibility it carried. They understood that this steel giant would soon face the ultimate trial. Every weld, every measurement, every beam would be tested under fire. Mothers and wives watched from the docks, waving to the men as they toiled, knowing many of those same men had sons who might one day serve aboard her. The Iowa was more than a machine. She was a promise to every American family that their nation would endure. When the day of her launch came, the harbor held its breath. The scaffolds were stripped away, the final bolts released, and a hush swept across the gathered crowd. A single voice broke the silence, the ceremonial words of dedication, followed by the roar of release as the USS Iowa slid into the Atlantic waters for the first time. The sea embraced her with a surge of white foam, and for a brief, sacred moment, it seemed as though the ocean itself bowed to her might. Cameras clicked, flags waved, and a new chapter in naval history began. Her first days afloat were filled with testing and tuning as hundreds of engineers crawled through her passageways like veins in a living organism. Steamlines hissed, gauges trembled, and turbines roared to life with the deep, resonant growl of awakening thunder. The crew, young men drawn from farms, factories, and cities across America, stepped aboard with wide eyes and steady hearts. To them, this ship was not just their duty. It was their protector, their home, their weapon, and their symbol of purpose. Captain John L. McCreer, her first commanding officer, walked her decks in silence, feeling the weight of command press upon his shoulders. He knew that beneath his feet lay not only hundreds of men, but millions of hours of labor, the faith of a nation, and the hopes of every soldier fighting far from home. Each order he gave echoed through steel corridors. Each vibration of her engines felt like the pulse of a sleeping leviathan. Sea trials began under gray skies off the coast of Maine. The ocean was restless, the wind sharp, and the crew nervous. But when the Iowa's engines unleashed their full strength, the entire ship seemed to come alive. She cut through the waves with impossible grace, her bow rising and falling like the chest of a giant breathing in rhythm with the sea. Observers on nearby vessels stared in disbelief, a battleship moving faster than many destroyers, her wake stretching like a comet's tail. In that instant, the legend of the Iowa was born. Below deck, heat and noise filled the air. The engine rooms glowed with orange light, where machinists worked drenched in sweat, adjusting valves, reading instruments, and shouting over the roar of turbines. Oil-burned metal shuddered, and yet the rhythm remained perfect, as if the ship herself guided her crew. Every vibration told a story of balance between chaos and order, between human will and mechanical might. The first test of her main battery came weeks later. The crew gathered on deck, faces lit by anticipation. Orders echoed. A standby to fire. The ship fell silent. Then, with a thunderclap that shook the heavens, the Iowa's forward guns erupted in flame and smoke. The recoil sent a tremor through the hull, and sailors instinctively steadied themselves. Moments later, distant water columns rose miles away where the shells had landed. The rangefinders confirmed it. A perfect strike. The men cheered. For the first time, they felt the full power of the beast they served. From that day onward, confidence grew into reverence. Sailors began to refer to her affectionately as the Big Stick, borrowing from Theodore Roosevelt's old phrase, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." The name fit her perfectly. She was elegant yet deadly, calm yet unstoppable. The ship's corridors, once filled with the metallic echo of tools, now resonated with laughter, songs, and the murmur of camaraderie. Life aboard the Iowa began to form its own rhythm. Morning drills, gunnery practice, briefings, and endless maintenance. Every sailor had a role, every bolt a story. Above the surface, the ocean stretched endlessly, a mirror to the sky. But beneath that serene blue, the Iowa's hull sliced through the deep with unrelenting determination. At night, when the ship cruised in silence, sailors would gather on deck and look at the stars, knowing they were part of something far larger than themselves. The Iowa wasn't merely floating on the water, she was carving her name into history. Word of her performance spread quickly through the Navy. Admirals took notice. Other battleships had strength, but none combined speed, range, and resilience like Iowa. She could escort aircraft carriers, hunt enemy battleships, and lead strike groups across the vast Pacific. Strategists began to see her as the cornerstone of a new doctrine, one that merged the old might of battleships with the emerging dominance of air power. Iowa was proof that the age of steel still had fury left to unleash. In the following months, the final armaments were installed, radar systems calibrated, and communication networks refined. Every inch of the ship was a masterpiece of engineering, from her bridge, high and proud above the deck, to the magazines buried deep below, where tons of ammunition were stored like the heartbeats of a sleeping god. She could endure torpedoes, shrug off bombs, and still deliver annihilation across the horizon. The crew trusted her completely, but there was also something spiritual about her presence. Visitors who stepped aboard spoke of an unexplainable aura, a feeling that this was not just cold metal, but something alive. Her decks gleamed in the morning sun, her guns rested in silent readiness, and her American flag snapped sharply in the wind. She was a floating fortress, but also a symbol of home, justice, and resilience. By the summer of 1943, as preparations for her first combat deployment began, the Iowa stood as the crown jewel of American naval might. She was no longer a secret. Intelligence reports from enemy nations whispered her name with caution and curiosity. The Japanese called her the ghost ship for her speed and silence during maneuvers. The British admired her grace. Even America's own allies recognized that something extraordinary had entered the waters. Her sailors, now seasoned by training and bonded by duty, knew they would soon face the fire of real war. They checked every system, oiled every bearing, and polished every brass fitting as if performing rituals to summon protection. The ship had become their faith, her engines their hymns, her guns their prayers. When orders finally arrived to join the Pacific Fleet, they gathered on deck as the sun set behind the Brooklyn skyline. The harbor lights shimmered across her armor, and for a moment, the entire city seemed to watch in awe. As tugs guided her out to sea, families waved from the docks. The men on board stood tall, aware that their journey would define their lives. The Iowa moved forward with steady grace, her bow cutting into the Atlantic like destiny itself. Every sound, the churn of her propellers, the whistle of the wind across her deck, the deep hum of her engines, felt like the voice of America rising. She was more than metal. She was determination made tangible. Her creation had taken thousands of minds and millions of hands, but her spirit belonged to all who believed in victory. The USS Iowa was the answer to fear, the embodiment of courage, and the ultimate expression of industrial genius turned into wartime poetry. As she sailed toward the open sea, her hull glistening under the final light of day, no one could have imagined the legacy she would carve across history's bloodiest water. The first time the USS Iowa tasted the fury of the Pacific, the ocean seemed to acknowledge her presence with both fear and awe. It was early 1944, and the war in the Pacific had reached a critical moment. Battles were no longer isolated skirmishes, but sprawling campaigns stretching hundreds of miles across islands and atolls. Intelligence reports had confirmed the enemy's growing desperation. Japanese forces were entrenched, their fortifications layered with concrete and barbed wire, their coastal guns trained on every possible approach. Against this backdrop, the Iowa was not merely a participant in the war. She was a herald of American power, a force that could unmake the defenses of an empire. Her first combat assignment was to escort aircraft carriers, the beating heart of the fleet, across the treacherous waters of the Central Pacific. Enemy submarines prowled beneath the waves, waiting for the moment to strike. Yet the Iowa moved with confidence, her hull cutting through the swell like a predator through the water. On her decks, sailors adjusted anti-aircraft guns, checked radar instruments, and exchanged tense, knowing glances. Each man understood that the slightest mistake could mean death, yet beneath the tension there was a sense of purpose, a quiet certainty that they were part of something greater. The sun rose on their formation like a signal flare, illuminating the massive guns that now loomed over the deck, ready to roar. When the first enemy aircraft was spotted on the horizon, the Iowa's crew sprang into action with the precision of a well-oiled machine. The 5-inch guns rattled into position, their mechanical arms raising shells in a deadly ballet. Radar operators shouted coordinates, and spotters on the masts scanned the skies with binoculars, eyes straining against the glare of dawn. Then, with a thundering roar that shook the steel beneath their feet, the Iowa unleashed her firepower. Explosions erupted miles away, columns of water and smoke marking the destruction of incoming bombers before they could reach the carriers. The ship's crew cheered not out of joy, but out of the raw, necessary satisfaction of survival. In that moment, the Iowa became more than a battleship. She became an unstoppable guardian, a wall of steel and fire between her allies and death. Days later, she moved into bombardment operations, her massive 16-inch guns ready to strike entrenched enemy positions along the Japanese-held islands. The first salvo was fired at a fortified coastline, and the concussion of the guns rattled the decks like thunderclaps. Sailors staggered slightly under the force, clutching rails, yet their faces were steady with determination. Mile after mile, shell after shell tore through bunkers, artillery positions, and supply depots. The shockwaves shattered not only structures but morale, as the enemy realized that no defense could withstand such concentrated fire. Each strike was precise, calculated using the latest targeting charts and rangefinders, ensuring that every ton of explosive energy delivered maximum devastation. The Iowa's presence during carrier raids further demonstrated her unmatched versatility. While aircraft launched into the skies to strike inland targets, she provided cover, her radar-guided guns scanning for any sign of Japanese fighter planes attempting to break through. Kamikaze attacks became a terrifying reality during this period, the sky suddenly aflame with suicide pilots determined to crash into the fleet. But the Iowa's anti-aircraft gunners were relentless. Each plane that entered range was met with a wall of fire, tracers streaking through the air in brilliant arcs. Explosions lit up the horizon as one after another, attackers were neutralized, their planes plummeting into the sea. The sailors felt the heat of each blast, the vibration of each shot through the decks, and the knowledge that their ship was saving not just itself, but hundreds of lives across the carriers she shielded. During amphibious assaults, the Iowa became a mobile artillery platform of unimaginable power. Troops landed on beaches under the protective umbrella of her guns, while Japanese defensive positions crumbled from her relentless bombardment. Observation officers coordinated with forward spotters on nearby islands, marking targets and adjusting fire in real time. Every shell that landed was a mixture of raw kinetic force and precise engineering, the culmination of months of training and human effort. For the soldiers on the beaches, the thunder of her guns was both terrifying and reassuring. Terrifying because of the sheer destructive force, reassuring because each round cleared the way for their advance. The Iowa had become a silent partner in victory, her massive guns translating strategy into tangible results. Even under threat from enemy battleships, the Iowa's speed and firepower made her a nightmare to contend with. Japanese commanders quickly learned that engaging her directly was tantamount to inviting destruction. Her 16-inch guns could outrange nearly every ship in the theater. Her radar gave her unparalleled targeting advantage, and her armor could withstand punishment that would cripple other battleships. In fleet formations, she led the way, scouting enemy positions, drawing fire when necessary, and then responding with devastating counterattacks. Sailors spoke in hushed tones of the way the ocean seemed to recoil beneath her fire, as if recognizing that a force of this magnitude belonged not to mortal men, but to history itself. Night operations added another layer of intensity to her mission. The darkness of the Pacific could conceal enemies, but the Iowa's searchlights and radar-guided fire turned night into day. Enemy ships attempting stealthy movements were detected before they could strike, and the Iowa's guns responded with swift, accurate fire. Sailors felt the ship shudder with each salvo, their boots slipping on decks slick with salt water, yet their training kept them steady. Smoke and fire illuminated the night sky, and the reflections on the rolling waves created a surreal, almost cinematic tableau of war. Steel, fire, and human determination intertwined in a deadly dance. Despite her overwhelming power, the Iowa was never invincible. Storms tested her mettle, waves crashing against her hull with the fury of nature itself. Sailors worked tirelessly to secure equipment, seal compartments, and ensure that the ship could continue her mission even under the harshest conditions. In the eye of the storm, as lightning flashed and wind screamed, the Iowa seemed almost alive. Bow cutting through the water, decks rising and falling like a living heartbeat, her massive guns silent but ready. She was a fortress, a guardian, and a testament to human ingenuity, able to face both man and nature without faltering. Through every operation, the Iowa's crew became as much a part of the ship as her steel and machinery. Officers coordinated fire control and navigation, gunners trained constantly to maintain perfect accuracy, engineers maintained the turbines and boilers, sailors and deckhands ensured that every inch of the vessel was secure. There was no room for error. The lives of hundreds depended on their precision. Yet in the moments between missions, sailors shared laughter, stories and music, creating a bond that was strengthened by both danger and triumph. The Iowa was not just a warship. She was a home, a team, and a shield against the chaos of war. Her reputation quickly spread across the Pacific theater. Enemy commanders whispered of her unstoppable presence. Allied commanders celebrated her arrival, knowing that she could tilt the balance of power in critical engagements. In every major operation, from escort missions to bombardments, from amphibious assaults to night raids, the Iowa proved that her combination of speed, firepower, and armor made her the most dangerous American warship in World War II. She was the tip of the spear, a symbol of strength that the fleet could rely on with absolute certainty. By mid-1944, after months of continuous operations, the Iowa had carved a legacy through the Pacific. She had survived storms, enemy fire, and the immense strain of constant combat, emerging unscathed and unbroken. Her guns had silenced fortifications, protected thousands of men, and demonstrated the full might of American industrial and military capability. Sailors aboard her came to respect her not merely as a machine, but as an entity with will and power, a participant in battle as much as any man on deck. To the men who served, the Iowa was more than metal and fire. She was honor, courage, and survival incarnate. Every shell fired, every maneuver executed, and every enemy thwarted reinforced the Iowa's legend. Observers noted her precision and efficiency. Photographers captured moments of thunderous fire across the horizon, and even enemy intelligence recognized that she represented a strategic nightmare. She was a nightmare made real, moving across the waves with lethal elegance, her massive guns capable of reshaping battlefields. And through it all, her crew endured, trained, disciplined, and unyielding, their hearts and hands driving the ship forward with every mission, every dawn, every engagement. By the end of the Pacific campaigns, the Iowa had become synonymous with American naval dominance. Her name was whispered among soldiers and sailors alike, a talisman of hope and a symbol of destructive capability. The world had witnessed her wrath, a wrath tempered by precision, controlled by intellect, and fueled by an unwavering sense of duty. She had earned the title of the most dangerous American warship of World War II, not through legend alone, but through the harsh reality of combat, the proof of steel, fire, and courage that few ships could rival. Even after the thunder of World War II had faded, and the Pacific waters grew quiet, the USS Iowa refused to fade into history. The war had carved its scars into every deck, every bulkhead, and every sailor who had served aboard her, yet she emerged not as a relic, but as a testament to enduring power. Decommissioned briefly, she returned years later, transformed by the lessons of modern warfare. Her guns updated, radar systems enhanced, and propulsion refined to meet the challenges of a new era. The world had changed, yet the Iowa remained. A colossus of steel and determination, ready to remind the world of the might she once wielded so decisive. Her return to service was not merely functional. It was ceremonial, symbolic, and deeply emotional for those who had known her in the heat of battle. Naval historians and veterans alike watched as she slipped into the waters once again, her hull gleaming under the morning sun, reflecting decades of service and sacrifice. Though her battleship's peers had long since been retired, scrapped, or sunk, the Iowa remained, a sentinel of the seas. She embodied lessons learned from conflict, precision, adaptability, and resilience, proving that power built with intelligence and discipline never truly grows old. Her decks carried not only machinery but memory. Every rivet unfurled a record of battles fought, victories earned, and lives protected. During the Korean and later Cold War periods, the Iowa once again took her place as the backbone of the fleet. She participated in training exercises that tested the boundaries of naval tactics, demonstrating that her combination of speed, firepower, and armor remained unparalleled. Aircraft carriers relied on her presence, knowing that the massive 16-inch guns could obliterate coastal targets, suppress enemy positions, and support amphibious operations if necessary. Every salvo fired during these exercises echoed with history, a reminder of the lessons she had already taught in the crucible of war. The men aboard moved with familiar precision, honoring the same discipline and camaraderie that had marked the Pacific campaigns. Even in peacetime, the Iowa's presence commanded respect. Diplomats and foreign delegations touring the ship would pause at the sight of her towering guns, polished brass fittings, and massive hull, realizing that they stood before a vessel that had shaped the course of modern naval history. Her corridors, once filled with sailors preparing for battle, now resonated with guided tours, educational briefings, and ceremonies, yet the aura of readiness remained palpable. Veterans visiting the decks would place hands on railings, eyes misting as memories of fire, smoke, and ocean storms returned vividly. The ship had become more than a weapon. She was a monument, steel-etched with courage, a floating museum of human endeavor and national pride. Modernization in the 1980s further cemented her relevance. Missiles were integrated, targeting systems upgraded, and her engines overhauled, blending contemporary technology with the original design. Engineers marveled at how a ship designed in the early 1940s could still serve as a formidable tool of deterrence decades later. During fleet exercises, the Iowa moved with confidence, her guns trained, her radar scanning the horizon, and her crew performing maneuvers that would have been unthinkable for other ships of her age. Observers recorded her speed, firepower, and tactical versatility, realizing that she remained a threat to any adversary who dared challenge the United States naval supremacy. She had become timeless, a living bridge between the battles of World War II and the strategic realities of the late 20th century. The Iowa's legacy extended beyond her weapons and engineering. She represented a philosophy of power, one built not on fear alone but on preparation, intelligence, and adaptability. Her decks had trained generations of sailors, imparting lessons of discipline, teamwork, and courage under pressure. Every sailor who had walked her corridors carried a piece of that legacy forward, sharing stories that inspired recruits and officers alike. Her guns may have fired fewer rounds in modern conflicts, but the psychological weight she carried was no less powerful. Enemies remembered, allies respected, and history revered her as the ultimate embodiment of American naval ingenuity. Even as she transitioned into a museum and memorial, permanently docked and open to the public, the Iowa retained her aura of strength. Visitors would walk her decks, staring at the massive turrets and feeling the vibration beneath their feet as if the ship still breathed. Children would run along passageways, imagining the roar of her engines and the fire of her guns, connecting across generations with the men who had once served aboard. Veterans would salute, tears catching the sunlight on polished metal, recalling the camaraderie, fear, and triumph that had defined their service. The Iowa had become a teacher, a guardian of history, and a silent witness to the human spirit under fire. In quiet moments, when the sun sets behind her massive hull and the harbor waters reflect her towering superstructure, one can almost hear the echoes of battle. The roar of the 16-inch guns, the hiss of the turbines, and the shouts of sailors blend into a distant memory of war. Yet she stands unyielding, a testament that true power endures. The Iowa reminds the world that strength is not only measured by firepower, but by the ability to adapt, survive, and inspire across generations. Every rivet, every weld, every scar tells a story of courage, sacrifice, and the relentless pursuit of excellence. Her historical significance resonates beyond her own service. Naval academies study her design, strategists reference her capabilities, and historians recount her battles. She is a benchmark for engineering excellence and military planning, a standard against which every subsequent warship is measured. The Iowa has taught lessons that extend far beyond the ocean, about leadership, the balance of speed and power, and the human ingenuity required to control forces that could easily destroy if left unchecked. She embodies the intersection of technology, strategy, and human will in a way few vessels ever have. Even as years pass, the Iowa's legend continues to grow. Documentaries, books, and films portray her as more than a ship, as an icon. Her story is taught not only to sailors, but to civilians who seek to understand the breadth and impact of naval warfare. The Iowa exemplifies how preparation, foresight, and unrelenting dedication can transform a machine into a symbol, a tool into an emblem of national pride. She is immortal not because of her physical presence alone, but because of the imprint she has left on history, on the minds of those who witnessed her in action, and on the generations inspired by her legacy. The USS Iowa's decks still gleam under careful maintenance, her guns silent yet poised, and her hull standing resolute against the currents and tide. Visitors walk her passageways and feel the weight of history pressing against the steel walls, understanding in an instant that they are in the presence of something extraordinary. Sailors and civilians alike can sense the ship's story in the subtle creak of the decks, the polished shine of her turrets, and the massive shadow she casts across the water. She is an enduring reminder that the most dangerous warship of World War II never truly dies. She merely waits, a living testament to power, courage, and resilience. Even as technology advances and new warships take to the seas, the Iowa remains unparalleled in her story. She bridges the past and present, reminding all who encounter her that greatness is built through human ingenuity, sacrifice, and the relentless pursuit of mastery. She has endured storms, enemy fire, and the passage of time, yet she stands undefeated. The USS Iowa is a sentinel of history, a guardian of the legacy of every sailor who has served aboard, and a reminder that true power is as much about discipline and intellect as it is about sheer firepower. Her story is not frozen in the past. Every visitor who walks her decks, every sailor who recounts her battles, every historian who analyzes her campaigns adds to a living legend. The Iowa teaches that strength, when wielded responsibly, inspires awe, protects lives, and shapes history. She is the embodiment of American naval power, a tangible connection between the sacrifices of war and the enduring spirit of service. Her guns may no longer roar in anger, but their echo reverberates across oceans, memory, and the imagination. The USS Iowa remains the most dangerous American warship of World War II, not only for the enemies she defeated, but for the inspiration, confidence, and awe she continues to instill around the world.